por hacer de Internet lo que es hoy, tenemos el enorme orgullo, privilegio, placer, y se me acaban los adjetivos para calificar lo que significa tener con nosotros en el mismo escenario, en el mismo momento del tiempo, y aquí, en México DF, en la mejor y mayor campus party de la historia, a los padres fundadores. Con vosotros, Gore, Tim Berners-Lee y Vint Cerf. ¡Un aplauso, por favor! Les dejo en buenas manos. Gore, ongoing con vosotros.
Hello. Thank you all for coming. We'll all try and talk slowly for the benefit of the translators. So the format is that I'm going to ask a few questions of our panelists today, and then we're going to have a bit of a free-form discussion, and then we're opening it to questions from the floor, and I think they're bringing those in via Twitter, if I have that right. So I wanted to start with you, Mr. Gore, and with a bit of your history in relation to the internet. In 1995, you held the very seminal Oh, apparently you're to speak last. No one told me that. Tim, why don't we start with you then? You've been very vocal in the United Kingdom, where we both live, in talking to Parliament about the extent to which network access is a human right, and the extent to which networks shouldn't be treated as merely a convenient way for getting top 40 music without paying for it, and regulating networks as though the only people who have a stake in them is the entertainment industry is a scary idea. Here in Mexico, the Senate has recently rejected ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, but it's likely that it may still come to pass. Do you have any feelings about how we get the world's governments to take the network more seriously?
Do I have any feelings? I could talk about it for hours. I need a mic. Oh, you're good. Yeah, I'm good. You're good? Okay. Yes, of course, I have a lot of feelings, but of course, in a way, the internet and the fact that you communicate between one person and another through all these computers that are connected together is something that I prefer to take for granted. Because the great thing for me about the internet technology, which Vint and colleagues put together more than 40 years ago, is that it's a platform. It's just a solid platform. I could build what I wanted to do on it. So 40 years ago, when Vint invented the internet, he didn't have in mind all the things that people would do with it. He just made it as a general purpose tool. 20 years ago, when I invented the web, I could use the internet because it was a platform, and I built a new platform, the web, and the idea is that that should be a solid platform that anybody can do anything with too. You, of course, are all the sorts of people who are going to be doing really exciting things using the web as a platform. And some of the things you'll do will build new platforms on top of that, like the platforms being built now of web applications. So all this depends on the fact that you can go and use the internet for whatever you can imagine. You can go and make a website with whatever you can imagine. That's the exciting power of computers, that if you can imagine them doing something, You can do it. And you don't have to ask anybody. It's not a centralized system. I didn't have to, when I invented the web, I wrote the server code and wrote the client code. I didn't have to go and ask Vint, please, can I make a new application? I didn't have to go and ask Steve Jobs. I didn't have to ask anybody. Actually, I did have to ask somebody for the port number 80. But before that, I just used port number 2784, which was my parents' phone number. It's decentralized. Anybody can do what they want. And that is the power, and that's why it's so important. The important thing for governments to realize is that what's exciting about it is all the things that's happening, the things that are happening in the future. Yes, governments are being pushed by large record companies to try to control all the children out there who are stealing music. But really, of all the companies out there that are doing exciting things on the internet, only a very small number of those are music companies. And a lot of the people doing very exciting things like in music are really finding a huge benefit from the internet. So, yes, I think it's really important that we keep it open. We keep it so that when you invent a new idea, when you create a new type of website, when you create a new protocol on the internet, you can just go and implement it. And there's not somebody in the central government that you have to register it with. And that basically we keep this series of platforms.
So, Tim, first of all, I completely agree with the basic premise that this should stay a very open system. One of the things that I believe I can say with great confidence is that only a small percentage of all the possible applications of the internet have been invented. I'm waiting for you to invent the other 95% or more. The internet is evolving, and every time it changes, it creates new opportunities for new kinds of applications to be developed. Now we have mobiles, and those mobiles are very powerful computers. They can be and are connected to the internet. They create yet another platform on which to develop new products and services. To answer Corey's question, how to present that to people who make policy, and we're hoping you will give us a good clue about that too, is that, well, because you've been a very powerful policymaker, so we might learn something from that. I think we need to paint a very positive picture of the economic value that the internet has brought to economies around the world. It's created opportunities for permissionless invention, which is exactly what Tim was saying. You didn't have to get permission from every internet service provider in the world. You didn't have to get permission from me. You didn't have to get permission from the government to go and build and try out a new application. Now, we will be foolish if we try to pretend that there are no bad things that happen on the net. There are bad things that happen. There are harms that occur. And we need to do something about that, just as we do in many other situations where a technology can be used for good purposes and bad ones. But we don't kill the technology. We don't destroy the platforms. We agree on norms, and we agree on practices that we accept are socially acceptable. And we enforce rules. But we don't stop people from developing their ideas. And so I hope, Corey, that we can collectively persuade the policymakers that this is something we need to invest in to allow all of us to contribute to a community that shares information and develops new capabilities. What advice would you give us, Mr. Vice President?
Hola, Capuceros. I am thrilled to be here. Forgive me for not speaking in Espanol. Thank you for listening to me in my native language. Thank you, Corey, for moderating this panel. We look forward to your questions and the give and take. And I want to begin by saying that it is a tremendous honor for me to share the same stage with my longtime friend, Vint Cerf, and my friend Tim Berners-Lee, who I've not known as long, but who I admire greatly. These two men have done more than virtually anyone else to make the internet and the web what it is today. And the one thing that I wanted to say, if I could, Corey, before we get into a more detailed discussion, is to set the context for what I think the most important challenge facing all of us is. The internet is an empowering technology that is essential for the survival of democracy. It is now being challenged. There are more than a few governments around the world that are trying to change the governance and protocols that make the internet free so that it can be subjected to more controls. There are also corporate interests, some of them legitimate, that are sometimes pressed far beyond wise boundaries. Modern democracy arose in the wake of the printing press, which had characteristics similar to what we see on the internet today. Individuals had easy access. All they needed to do was learn to read and write. Printing presses were everywhere and inexpensive, and those who authored text containing their ideas were able to put them into circulation, and they spread much in the manner of a Google search today. Those ideas that attracted more resonance and agreement rose in prominence and attracted a greater audience still. And a dozen generations after the printing press, through the period we call the Enlightenment, the reawakening of the ancient dream of democracy led to a revolution worldwide that installed constitutional democracies. But this medium of the printing press was overtaken by the broadcasting media. And though there are many great people who work in broadcasting, the architecture of that technology was more centralized. Access was not available to individuals who did not have an enormous amount of money. Large corporations and governments and powerful interests were able to dominate the flow of ideas over the broadcast medium, both television and radio. And that is still the case. The internet is still in its early days. And as cheaper smartphones proliferate around the world, and as social networks spread throughout the planet, this new combination of technologies will once again make it possible for people, this time billions of people, to interact freely with one another and to lift up the better ideas for self-governance and the struggle against corruption and against violence and the struggle for the environment. We have to use the internet to stop global warming by spreading the ideas that can reduce the emissions of global warming pollution. But just as we have a climate crisis, we have a democracy crisis. And the solution is going to be found on the internet, and that again is why its freedom must be defended. So Camposeros, defend the freedom of the internet.
And computers are designed, and what I think of as a shift in the way that users are treated in the network. There's a truism that if you're getting something for free, chances are you're the product. And certainly we see that increasingly in all of the technologies that we use. The science of tracking what you do with your browser has seen enormous leaps and bounds in the last 5 to 6 years, but the science of you in your browser knowing what's being done to you is stagnant. If you were to, for example, turn on the switch that allows you in your browser to watch every cookie as it comes in, your browser would be unusable. There's literally no way to use the internet in such a fashion that you can evaluate how services are evaluating you. Is there a future in which we run back away from the model where, as you said, Steve Jobs gets to tell you whether or not you can run an app on your device, or where in Android, when you install an app, you get to say, you may have access to my location or you may not have access to my location, but not, yeah, I'll turn on location, but I'm going to lie to you about my location because it's in my interest to install the app, but it's not in my interest for my phone to tell you where I am. So yes, I'll turn off the location box on, my 3-year-old daughter has an Android app she likes. It's a little puzzle game. But in order for her to play it, we have to allow our Android phone to send our location back to the person who made the app. So increasingly, we are the product. We aren't the scanner that takes pictures and measurements of our environment. We are the environment that's measured by our networks. The epitome of this is at my daughter's daycare, where there is a CCTV over the door that takes her picture, and beneath it, a sign that says, "No cameras allowed." Can we have a future in which we are once again the scanners and not the barcode, where we are the users and not the products of our information society?
So this is only a question that a science fiction writer like Gore could come up with. First of all, let me point out that with regard to Android, Google doesn't control all of the ways in which Android is used. We make the software available for free, and the makers of mobile phones and other kinds of devices use it, and they establish whatever ground rules they choose to make. But let's explore your idea a little bit. The idea of essentially lying to the network is fairly appealing, and a number of people do that. They make up identifiers for themselves that have nothing to do with their real identities. So the ability to present yourself however you want to is one of the ways in which people explore the internet and its applications. Your concern, I guess, is that the actions that you take, which are captured by cookies and other kinds of mechanisms, still paint a picture of your activity, even if we have no idea who you are. And in some cases, I don't think we care who you are. We only care that we match whatever it is you seem to be interested in with something that we would like to show you. In our case, it's advertisements. It sounds to me like what you would like is to allow the users to fashion a reality that they present back to the network. The only reason that I would find this not necessarily entirely helpful is that a lot of what you discover from the internet is a consequence of what everyone else is doing. The internet's content, thanks to Tim Berners-Lee, has grown by leaps and bounds because people have found ways to introduce content in the net through the World Wide Web. Tim made it easy for them to do that. I hope that you weren't trying to lead to the point where you didn't want people to put information in the net and share it with others, because the biggest power of the internet that I see is my ability to benefit from the information other people choose to share. And this is probably the place where you wanted to end up, which is choice. What can I choose to share? What can I choose not to share? Google, just to speak for them and specifically, does appreciate that. When we introduced Google+, we put a lot of mechanisms in place to allow people to control what got shared and with whom. There's a very big attention being paid to privacy. But would you want to explore this a little further? And you made some notes, so let's talk a bit more. And we may also have some comments from Tim and Al.
Sure. The early browser is a good example of what I mean by productively lying to the network. Because browsers from early on transmitted something called the user agent string. And it would say, I'm a copy of Internet Explorer, or I'm a copy of Mosaic, or I'm a copy of Firefox, or I'm a copy of Opera or of Chrome. at one point, my bank decided that I could only use Internet Explorer to access its website. So I told my copy of Firefox to say, I am a copy of Internet Explorer. Increasingly, our devices don't allow us to say, you want to know what location I'm in. I don't think it's any of your business. My location is the dark side of the moon.
I have to point out at this point that the bank was wrong. The bank had used open standards. This was not a problem. So that obviously you can build, if you start building very broken things on slightly broken things in order to get over the problem from the original slightly broken thing, you can end up building some very, very complicated broken things. One of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to keep the technology clean and simple, because one of the things that makes a platform easy to build on is it's clean and simple. So I'd encourage you to, what you should do is go back to your bank and say, how dare you insist that I buy my browser from one particular company, right? I don't insist to my friends that they use a particular bank, and my grocery store doesn't insist that they use a particular bank, and so on. I have free choice in these things. No, you should have beaten up on your bank to get them to use open standards that will be used in any browser. So, okay. So in general, if we go down the path of lying about things, then we go away from what is actually the useful side of data. Well, I in fact think the other side of all this personal data is that the machines around me know more and more about what I'm doing, and that's useful because they can't help me unless they do. Well, one example was that we discovered that MIT issued our MIT ID cards. We got new cards, different color, just like the red ones. But the orange ones, it turned out nobody told us they had an RFID sensor in them, so you could swipe them without touching. And everybody was, and MIT didn't say, by the way, these have RFID in them. And so there was a big fuss about privacy. But meanwhile, I'm thinking, wait a moment, every time I go to work, I'm telling the system that I'm at work. And every time I go home, I check when I leave the parking garage, the system knows that I've left the parking garage. Now that's useful information to me. Actually, if you have that information, I want you to send it to me in XML. Okay? Some of the time, I'll make a little calendar. I'll turn it into iCal format, and I'll have one of my calendar feeds when I was at work. And sometimes when I'm going back trying to figure out what on earth I was doing one Thursday, I'll know whether I was at MIT or not. That is just one little bit of information. If you take all this information, so long as we mark it as to where it's come from, and we mark it as to what it can be used for, so we know whether we can trust it, and we know what it's appropriate to use it for, then I think putting together all this information is really valuable, and I want to be the beneficiary of it. I don't know whether that was partly what you were trying to get at. Was that the user being in charge?
So that's a beautiful example of a kind of information about your habits that no third party need be involved with. Your phone could gather that information on your behalf, it could store it on your behalf, it could present it to you on your behalf without your employer gathering it. We've never really had, apart from a few punch-in systems, we never really had a norm where every time you get up to the toilet, your employer knows that you've been. Your phone can keep track of that for you if you're trying to keep track of your bathroom habits, or without you having to tell your employer about when you're going.
Well, that's not the segue I was looking for, but...
Clarified, MIT does not have card entry to the toilets.
But they might have an RFID reader.
Well, already the amount of information traveling over the internet between things has a volume far in excess of the amount of information traveling between and among people. One of the guiding principles of the campus party, and by the way, I want to congratulate Paco Ragueles and Juan Negrillo and Belinda Galliano and the others who have made this all possible. One of their guiding principles is that the internet is a network of people and not a network of machines. And we have to protect that central idea. And where privacy is concerned, one of the reasons why there have been so many violations and so many problems is that in almost every country, people have been so impressed by the convenience of these devices and the connections and the services that are made possible with this robust information flow that they have acquiesced in violations of privacy in return for the convenience that comes from the flow of information. But this pattern of acquiescence has now reached a point where people are coming into contact with the important human values that must be protected and can only be defended if there are lines drawn on privacy. The terrible events in the United Kingdom with the young girl whose phone mail was hacked. It's not my purpose to go into that, except as an illustration of a line being reached. That violation of privacy was one that people understood intuitively was a horrible violation of human values. Well, there are many other violations of privacy that have not caused a lot of news coverage and public outrage. But in order to realize the potential of the internet as a network of people, we have to understand that there is now a new potential for creating a matrix of information that can result in routine and very harmful violations of privacy, to the point where the quality of our lives together and the quality and tone of our democracies is profoundly damaged.
Yes, please. Can we turn Vint's mic on?
Okay, so there's a positive message that we could also extract from this, and it's one that I would like to offer to every one of the Campesteros who are here and the other 140,000 of you who have been here in the past. We can collectively choose to adopt a set of ethics about the use of the technology that we are building, designing, and inventing, and simply try to influence other people to think along those same lines. And so the notion of using this technology in an ethical way, in a way that preserves human values, seems to me if not a responsibility or an obligation, at least it's an opportunity that we can all choose to exercise. Many people who make policy, unlike Vice President Al Gore, don't really understand a lot of the technology and don't know what kinds of policies would make sense and that would preserve human values. So this is something we can share with them in order to help make that policy decision-making a lot more appropriate.
So that's a great segue, much nicer than the bathroom one I gave you earlier, Al. To the last question I wanted to put to you, what I started with. In 1995, you spearheaded the National Information Infrastructure hearings that really opened up the internet to being something more than a military and research network, into being something that civilians could be a part of. And at the time, a copyright lobbyist who'd come from Microsoft approached you with a proposal to regulate every copy on the internet as though it were a copy being made on a printing press, to require licenses for copies being made in RAM, copies being made in network buffers, and so on. And you, to your great and everlasting credit, told him to go away. But what he did was he went to WIPO in Geneva, the United Nations agency tasked with regulating copyright around the world. I sometimes say that WIPO has the same relationship to silly copyright laws that Mordor has to evil in Middle-earth. And he went to WIPO and created something called the WIPO Copyright Treaty that Mexico is a signatory to, that the United States became a signatory to through the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And that set the tone for how we end up regulating the network, that in international forums, norms are set and rules are made that no national Congress or regulator would on their own agree to. And the last year has seen an enormous uptick in this. starting with the anti-counterfeiting trade agreement that the United States brought around the world, and that they refused to allow public discussion of. It was conducted entirely in secret. At one point, the European Parliament asked if they could see the text of the agreement that was being negotiated on Europe's behalf, and the US Trade Representative intervened to say that they couldn't. ACTA contained provisions for criminal prosecution for copyright infringement, increased intermediary liability for organizations like Google that would require them to spy on their users and disconnect them, to remove content from the internet on accusation of copyright infringement. And now it's back, ACTA, in a new form called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Canada, where I'm from, the United Kingdom, Mexico, and the United States are all parties to. And TPP is also being negotiated in secret. The US has just appointed a string of federal prosecutors and attorneys general who came from the entertainment industry, and has promulgated a new law, Protect IP, that will increase intermediary liability, require surveillance of the internet, eliminate the presumption of privacy on the internet. And my question is, how do we restore the spirit of America that was there at the NII hearings in 1995 that said the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, freedom, privacy are core to the internet and they must make the transition to the digital world? And how do we roll back the America that's given us ACTA, that's given us TPP, that has given us intervention in the developing world in the form of things like CAFTA, and that stands for freedom on the internet?
Well, first of all, I no longer make policy.
I understand.
I am a recovering politician.
I understand.
I'm on about step 9. But I think that the key word is balance. That's a cliche. But innovation is already beginning to propose, to come up with some alternative approaches that I think play a much larger role. I know you have written about this extensively, but the Creative Commons licensing regime, I believe, has great promise, and I hope that it will grow. I think that there are legitimate complaints by the creators of intellectual property who invest their time and effort and often great resources only to have the results of their labors stolen from them, denying them any reward for their work. And were that to be the norm, then the value of intellectual property would decline, and the incentives for the creation of ever more valuable forms of intellectual property would be diminished. On the other hand, as you point out, the efforts to strangle every possible dissemination of knowledge that should be widely shared and could be without the violation of the legitimate rights of the intellectual property owner, and they have sometimes gone way too far. So I come back to that word balance, and I personally believe the best way to achieve that balance as we go forward is with innovative new regimes like the Creative Commons.
I wonder if I could jump in for just a second on 2 points. The first one is that although most of the visibility about intellectual property protection has come from the movie industry, the music industry, and so on, whose business depends on distributing that content widely and making it widely available to the public. So we hear the most about that problem of people taking it somehow. I can tell you that there are other thefts of intellectual property from parties who didn't want that intellectual property to be shared at all. Trade secrets, information about how you build specific things that make a particular product work. That's a bigger threat. And in some ways, the response to that is not legislation. The response to that is building a more secure internet. And so if you're looking for a serious piece of work to do, start thinking about how you can make the internet a safer place to do business, a safer place to exercise social networking and other kinds of applications. So that's a big task, but it's one that has a large technical component to it. The second observation I would make is that the intellectual property concerns about inappropriate sharing of content doesn't take into account the fact that we live in a digital world. Digital copying is easy. Digital distribution is easy. To try to treat intellectual property in that form as if it were a piece of paper or a book or a DVD is just plain silly. What we should do is get the engineers and the lawyers to sit down together and recognize that a digital world is different from the one those laws were originally created for, and ask ourselves, what kinds of choices and protections do we want to provide the creators of content? That's why the Creative Commons is such a good idea. I'm glad you brought that up. But I see this as an opportunity for invention, not an opportunity for retrograde attempt to apply regimes that don't work in a digital world.
Invention, that means you guys, okay, you're the inventors, right, for the next generation. So some of the things that you can think about are how do you make a payment system so that I can listen to some music online, I can set my computer up to give, maybe I decide that I'm going to spend a certain amount per month, maybe $60 a month, maybe $100, giving money to the people who make the music I like. How can I write a program to, run it, to find out who those people are that make the music that I like, get the money right back to them, the people that make it, not the people who've got old-fashioned, that used to make plastic records that are not relevant anymore. So yeah, I think that there's, one of the things to do is to certainly use Creative Commons, but if you really like the music that's been published under Creative Commons license, that means you can copy it for free, maybe with attribution, and maybe you'll mix it. But when you do, it's really nice to find a way of helping support the people who use that music. That's the other part of it. It's like with open source software. It's great that it's free. The other side of it, it's really nice if you can find a way of supporting it. But I want to sort of also bring us back, in a way, back into just Al said early on that he mentioned democracy. He mentioned that this thing being really important to democracy. The web is important for various things. One of the questions people are constantly asking is, how do I know what's true out there? One of the things that people use the internet for is to try to find out what is true. What really happened in a political situation? What should we really do? What would happen if we did that? What really is the situation with this chemical in my food? Is it bad for me or is it not? So that connects to science. The process of whereby we all collaborate, all agree and review each other's work and decide what's true, okay? But also we use the internet for figuring out what to do. And when we figure out what to do together, it's one form or another of democracy. And these, in a way, if we spend all our time worrying about kids stealing music, then we will forget these really important things. How to find out what's true, which is science, and how to find out what we should do with democracy. I noticed that there are these 4 sectors. There's things like innovation, and there's a sector of science somewhere, maybe it's the other way. It's great that there's a sector of science. Maybe Campus Party Mexico 4, there's going to be a sector of democracy, because you'll have so many people who are coding about ways to make a good democratic society, ways to figure out who you're going to believe, ways to find out what's true, ways that we can run the world in a decentralized but very powerful fashion so that we can preserve the things that we like, which we like about the world, like that it's fair, like the things we hear and end up believing are true. And I think developing new systems for those really important parts of what humanity needs are going to be more important in the future than worrying about copyright theft.
Could I build on that?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I think you've brought up an extremely important topic, Tim, and it goes, for me, it goes back to one of the distinctions between television and the internet. Because television is so centralized, and because access to the privilege of presenting ideas on a wholesale basis over television requires large amounts of money, it has resulted, I'll use my country as an example, in organized propaganda campaigns on issues like climate, for example, and almost every public policy question. Now, people sit in front of the television. In my country, the average individual watches television 5 hours per day, which is truly astonishing. And we are subjected to this massive set of campaigns to shape thinking, and the ability to find out what is true is sharply diminished. After World War II, a European philosopher who studied the impact of organized propaganda on democratic discourse wrote these words. Theodor Adorno was his name. He said, "When all questions of truth are converted into when all questions of fact are converted into questions of power, it attacks the very heart of the distinction between what is true and what is false." Now, the democratic discourse in my country in 2002, the period after the 9/11 attacks, was dominated by organized efforts to convince people that the person responsible for flying those planes into the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon was Saddam Hussein. Well, of course, he had absolutely nothing to do with it. But when the Senate voted to invade Iraq, 2/3 of the American people believed that as the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein was responsible for attacking us. So the question of fact had been converted into a question of power. The distinction between truth and falsehood had been attacked, and we made very bad decisions. Now, there is widespread disagreement and confusion about whether putting 90 million tons of global warming pollution into the atmosphere every 24 hours does what the scientists say the laws of physics mandate that it does. It traps heat. And look at what's been happening here in Mexico. Look at the events of the last year around the world. The flooding in Pakistan, the flooding in Australia, the drought and fires in Russia, the fires in the U.S.'s Southwest. My home city of Nashville had a 1,000-year rainfall, and the list goes on and on. The Mississippi River, largest flood in history. Missouri River, largest flood in history. I could go on with this list. And now, still, people say, oh, I'm not sure. Well, oil companies and coal companies are spending billions of dollars to promote a version of reality that is false. Now, by the way, I did want to get this in. Here in Mexico City, September 14th, the Climate Reality Project is launching a global event. It's already been announced. But it will start at 7 p.m. Mexico City time, September 14th, with a special slideshow that I'm completing now that will stream live on the internet, and then followed by a discussion. And then at 7 p.m. in the next time zone west, it will be given in English, and it will continue for 24 hours in all 24 time zones at the same time, local time, everywhere on Earth, and come back around at 7 p.m. Eastern time in New York City, where I will give the last of these slideshows. And it is called 24 Hours of Reality. And we are attempting to present the truth about the climate crisis on the internet. And I would love to have the support of campuseros here and those connected to us right now on the internet all over the world to promote the participation in that event, to discover what is true and to lift up reality so that we can defend the future of human civilization.
Thank you, Al. So I want to wrap back around to the notion of balance and to this idea that the internet can be a medium through which people can speak to each other and have a discourse about what is and isn't true, and relate it back to this notion of balance, copyright, and the creation of works. So YouTube has been under a legal threat from Viacom, an American entertainment giant, who among other things has said that YouTube should have the responsibility of hiring copyright lawyers to review 50 hours of video every minute. There aren't enough copyright or lawyer hours remaining between now and the heat death of the universe to actually conduct this, but they say that 50 hours a minute worth of video should be reviewed by copyright lawyers. Presumably the way you pay for that is by charging people to put things on YouTube. And they've also said that YouTube shouldn't be allowed to flag material as private, because if you can flag it as private, you can't tell if it infringes copyright. Now, I use YouTube to put videos of my 3-year-old daughter in the bath up where my parents can see them, and no one else can.
Corey, could you tell this audience the name of your daughter?
Yes, I certainly can. Her name is Boissy Emmeline Fibonacci Nautilus Taylor Doctorow. She is cute as a button. And I think that capacity to conduct private discourse and the capacity to conduct public discourse is ultimately more important than the fortunes of the entertainment industry. Now, I make my living in the entertainment industry. I'm a science fiction novelist. My books sell in the hundreds of thousands of copies. They're Creative Commons licensed. They're published by the largest publishers in the world. And even I, with someone who wants to feed his family with my creative work, if it comes to this, if it comes to either anyone can put video on the internet, either anything can be private, or in order to make sure that we defend intellectual property and people can go on creating, nothing can be private and only rich and powerful people can put things on the internet, I say, let the entertainment industry solve its own problems. The balance we need is the balance that says, first we protect speech and privacy. And if your industry can't cope with speech and privacy, solve your problem somewhere else. That's not negotiable. So how do we reassert that value when we talk about network policy?
Well, I think, Corey, you just did, and I think you did it rather well. In the case of YouTube, you're quite right. We can't cope with 50 hours of video per minute coming into the system in terms of trying to anticipate ahead of time whether something is a copyright problem. On the other hand, we have put some automatic tools together, and we've gotten credit from the industry that is concerned about intellectual property violations for having done that. Our purpose is to take advantage of one feature of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act called Notice and Takedown. It basically says that you are responsible to respond to a complaint about copyright violation if you're notified of it, but you don't have to anticipate it. And once you've been notified, you have the responsibility to determine whether or not the complaint is valid. If it's valid, you have to take action. What we tend to do is we validate the complaint, and then we also fingerprint the material which has been validated as potentially copyright violating, and we try to automatically detect that. Like you, I rather think that it's important for the industry to find ways to solve the problem that don't damage all of the human values that we share. And I still think, because I'm a technology optimist, that there are ways to do that. The internet is an enormous tent. You could go anywhere from public domain material all the way up to and including highly access controlled content that people have to pay for. I would observe that the publishing industry has already found itself shifting from the physical publication to digital publications. I think someone told me that 50% of all the books that are published through Amazon anyway, or provided through Amazon, are going onto Kindle in electronic form. So it's clear that some part of the industry is recognizing that they cannot escape from the digital world. I think your challenge, and the one which I hope we all undertake, is to find a way to satisfy the need to compensate people who want compensation and not penalize the people who would prefer to share their information some other way.
Thanks. So I think we've reached the point in the discussion where we take questions from the audience, at least looking at my watch. I'm not clear on how this process works, so gang, what do we do now? A question for Tim. What is your vision of the future of quantum computing?
I have no idea about quantum computing. Listen, I did 3 years of physics. That's not enough to call yourself a physicist, really, and certainly not enough to know about quantum computing. So sorry, we're going to have to. Luckily, this Twitter is full of more stuff.
Do either of you have an opinion on quantum computing?
It's a little mind-boggling.
So actually, I'm very interested in the subject, although I'm no expert. But I just got an email telling me that there was an experiment done that was able to preserve the quantum entanglement of a set of particles for hundreds of hours as opposed to microseconds or milliseconds. The implication of that is that if we can preserve the entangled state for longer periods of time, we can actually build quantum computers that have time to do the computations. Today it's much harder to do that because you lose the entanglement and you lose the basic quantum computation effect. So I'm actually a little more positive than I was literally yesterday about the potential.
So do we have another question from Twitter? Oh, I'm getting this one. So coming back to the New York Times then, surely the problem with the New York Times wasn't that it wasn't charging for content, but that Craigslist and Google had totally destroyed its classified advertising business. It never got much money from the newsstand. That barely covered the cost of the newsprint. The Guardian, the newspaper I write for in London, has exactly the same problem. It was entirely subsidized by car advertisements, which have moved to the internet, to places where they're more efficient, eBay and so on.
Well, I think it was a combination of factors. The migration of classified advertising onto the internet is certainly a huge factor. But you could reframe that by saying that made the New York Times more vulnerable to consequences from the loss of subscription revenue. And so you get to the same place.
Is this back up?
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, this notion of destroy and Google in the same sentence disturbs me a little bit, so I feel compelled to defend the company. First of all, the New York Times could have done online classified ads. It could have done it because the technology was available to do it. And why they didn't, I don't know. But the point is, there were opportunities there. The second thing is that the term newspaper brings two terms together that were very important from the economic point of view for a very long time, because paper was the least expensive way of distributing large quantities of information in a short amount of time on a regular basis. People always wanted to know what was new, and since they were reading it on a piece of paper, putting an advertisement on the piece of paper was a natural next step in order to support that whole process. So my sense right now is that advertising has moved into a very different era where you don't have to show the same thing to everybody, which is what you had to do with paper. And now you can send ads to people who are interested in particular things, and Google does that very well, so do others. The newspaper world has to separate paper from news, and it has to learn to build business models around the production of and presentation of news in a different medium than it had before. I still think that it's important for us to help them maintain the production of high-quality reporting, because that is an essence of democracy that you so eloquently talked about.
Yeah, and as yet, there have been very few business models for presenting journalism on the internet that throw off enough revenue to support a sufficiently large group of serious investigative journalists. Most of the journalistic outlets on the web emphasize aggregation of content mostly still from print publications, where the highest value content is created. Now that's beginning to change. ProPublica, there are a lot of other models that are beginning to provide content with a non-profit base and a blend of profit, for-profit and non-profit. But this has evolved more slowly than I would wish, and I think one of the great challenges, coming back to this democracy crisis, is to support high-quality journalism on the web.
So, can I
go ahead.
Can I just take over your role as chair for a moment?
Yeah, by all means.
Put that to Corey. Can I put that one to you?
Yes.
You're a blogger, and you're also a journalist working for The Guardian. So, which of these, you've got these two career paths. Do you feel, which do you feel most frightened about at the moment, and which you're most excited about? And in general, is blogging, could blog people making serious money from blogging with ads end up morphing into a form that replaces
I certainly don't believe that blogging will deliver revenue forever. I don't think that it's written in any constitution that thou shalt earn money from the thing that you earned money from when you were 35, when you're 65, or that thine industry shall sustain itself low unto the 25th century. So if something changes, I want to change with it. As a blogger, I'm more concerned, and as a journalist, I'm more concerned with questions of democracy than I am with questions of whether or not me personally can afford my flat or can afford my daughter's education. And so I'm more worried not about the overall fortunes of the New York Times, for whom I've written and which I read regularly, but I'm very worried, for example, that the next time the New York Times drops the ball on the Gulf War and reports that Saddam Hussein was responsible for invading Iraq, that no paywall stops me from linking to from denouncing them and linking to the stories in which they've conducted themselves badly and failed in their roles as guardians of democracy. So I don't care about information being free, but I care about people being free and free to discuss the issues of the day.
I just wanted to, excellent point. I just wanted to note briefly in passing, Tim pointed out that you also write for The Guardian, Corey, and it is the premier example in the world today of a newspaper. First of all, I read the New York Times and The Guardian every day. I think they're fantastic. But The Guardian has been able to stay on that phone hacking scandal for 5-6 years now, partly because they do not rely solely on subscription or advertising revenue. They are one of the first examples of a not-for-profit, for-profit hybrid because of the founder's family trust that was established decades ago in order to support high-quality journalism. I really think this hybrid model has great application elsewhere in the world. I hope that there will be other applications of it.
We have another question here from Twitter, and it covers, again, some of the material we covered earlier. I hope you gentlemen don't mind going back over it. Roja Liorov, I can't pronounce his Twitter handle, says, why do you agree or disagree with ACTA, the legislation in ACTA? And I would expand the process of ACTA as well, where internet regulation was conducted in secret.
This is the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Okay, so are we ready to do our thing here? So first of all, I know a lot of people were very disturbed by the way in which the ACTA text was produced. When I listened to the U.S. Trade Representative defending what they were doing, they believe that they did make opportunities available for the public and for other interested parties to comment on the text. If you've ever been involved in a complex negotiation, you can understand that sometimes you need to have private conversations just to figure out what the various positions are. I'm not going to try to act as apologist for the process or even the result, but I have some sympathy for the difficult process of finding places where you can compromise and where you can agree, and sometimes trying to do that in the public makes it harder to even discover what the compromise is because it's maybe so political. So I want to give them a little bit of leeway for the process that unfolded. On the other hand, the content of the result seems to be so lopsided to favor only one kind of interest in content and not to recognize what the internet has done, which is to open up the opportunity for everyone who wants to produce content and to share it with everyone. When you think about, you mentioned earlier about broadcasts and the centralized control of that, the internet undoes that. It creates opportunities for independent movie producers to get their content out and available and visible. The same could be said for music.
But not yet with business models that support the kind of investment that reaches broad audiences with movies over the internet.
But if we have to choose between 50 hours of homemade video a minute or 30 hours of robots throwing buildings at each other every summer, which do you choose? I mean, say we never get it again, right? The Protestant Reformation destroyed cathedral buildings. Well, no one built a cathedral after the Reformation.
I'll take the cat video.
Yeah, me too.
So here's, look, people like to be entertained and they like high quality results. I don't think that I would disagree with that either. I loved Avatar, for example, and I can't wait to see Harry Potter in the last episode, which I haven't seen yet. Okay. So I'm waiting for somebody to rip it off on the net. Actually,
he was joking.
Let me point out
on Google.
Wait. I don't know. I may be in a lot of trouble already here. Let me point out something about our ability to make predictions of technology. When the personal computer was introduced, a lot of the serious computer science people laughed and said it's just a toy. It really doesn't mean anything. We do serious computing here. We build mainframes. We build supercomputers. This is amusing, but that's about it. Well, how do we build supercomputers today? Google uses a classified number of devices that once would have been characterized as laptops or desktops. They're basic circuit boards. So those have turned topsy-turvy the understanding of what the capabilities were. The same thing, I think, can be said for internet and video on it, for example. As the bandwidths go up, as the quality of displays go up, as the capability to produce three-dimensional presentations, which is also going up. And I've seen some spectacular 3D stuff that multiple people can look at without special glasses, as opposed to one person sitting exactly right here and getting the 3D effect. I would say in the next 4 or 5 years, we are going to see some serious quality capable of being distributed through the internet. And as to the production side, if you have a Macintosh, serious Macintosh laptop, you can do almost all the video and audio editing you need to do in that one box.
Yeah, also on the iPad, and if I could just add to the story briefly, back when Vint and I worked together a lot in the late 70s and 80s, we worked together to establish legislation to set up the National Supercomputing Centers and the National Research and Education Network, the backbone network that was intended to demonstrate the capacities of what later came to be called the internet. But back in those days, the advances in supercomputing were just so stunning. And the most powerful supercomputer in the world, I remember at one hearing back in 1985, was the Cray 2. Well, I was looking at the stats the other day, and the 4-processor version of the Cray 2 in 1985 has almost exactly the same processing power as the iPad 2 does today. And it is astonishing. Underneath all of this, Moore's Law continues apace. Your question about quantum computing, where they are making a lot of progress, really illustrates the fact that there almost certainly is no foreseeable limit to Moore's Law. It is continuing at full speed. And that means that while the iPad 2 is the equivalent of the most powerful supercomputer in the world in 1985, what's it going to be 2, 4, 6, 8 years from now? We are on the verge of a true era of artificial intelligence. It's no longer just always 5 years away. There are now applications and programs and products that are beginning to enter the marketplace that are absolutely stunning. And so when I say it's early days, these guys are more expert and qualified to say that, but there's no question about the fact that, as they say in the US, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Right. I think what's, of course, fascinating about this, the turning over that this happened when suddenly what was only available to big companies becomes available to you on your laptop, so that you can, the turning over effect has been social. Right? It means that all you individual people can now compete with the big movie company. So one of the interesting things about lots of things like movies and like television channels and things, when you look at them, when you study how popular they are, that if you've learned about Moore's law, then you could also learn about Zipf's law. It's more difficult to say. Z-I-P-F. Zipf's law says that if you look and say at the radio station in a country, you might find that it's got a certain number. You plot it. That's just the most popular radio station. It has a certain number of people listening to it, and then often you find that the competition is pretty close behind, because if there's n people watching that, there's n divided by 2. People are actually listening to the second most popular radio station. And the third most popular radio station is right behind that. It's got n divided by 3. And it turns out often you actually find this n divided by 2, n divided by 3, n divided by 4. Okay, and this distribution, when you have lots and lots of radio stations, has the interesting property that sure, there's somebody is the leader, and there are some people following up, but there are lots and lots and lots of people. This is the distribution that has the famous long tail. Okay, so there are lots of interesting cases where there is a long tail when there are lots and lots of individual people have their own radio stations. And people find on the internet that this long tail has happened. Okay, and so the problem with television was that when you looked at television, you get the most popular television station, and then the next most popular television station, and that's it. There were only 2 media conglomerates in your town. Okay, and the problem for a lot of people with cable coming as well as broadcast TV is there's only 2, or maybe 1. So the nice thing about the internet is it had this long tail. People got all excited about the long tail, and for a while, I suppose during the exciting days of the dot-com boom, everybody was betting on the long tail, but bit by bit, large companies started to get together, and they bought more and more of these little businesses and put them together into medium-sized businesses. So in general, so what I put it to you is that, in fact, when Al talks about balance, actually you do need a balance. And when you need a balance, it's not that we just are all individual campuseros at our own desks with our own laptops, doing our own computing, making our own videos. It's not just long tail. We do need some really strong, amazing movement. Like Vint, I like things like Avatar and Harry Potter series. We need some people. It's great that we have people like J.K. Rowling who are just out of this world and blow us away with really great stories. And I think that's reasonable. So when you look at the world, balance means that there are some leaders. It's good to have leaders. But whenever you have a leader, it's really important to watch that the second one is right at their heels, and that there is a long tail. So whenever somebody worries about there being a monopoly, check. Is there competition? Is there a second? Is there a third? Is there a fourth? And there's a long tail. And anybody starts fighting too much for everything being equal, well, remember that it's really important to have some strong leaders as well.
So this question about competition is a really good one, and it brings up one area we haven't touched on at all, which is network competition, and the fact that all over the world, network providers who use our public rights of way, who often began as state monopolies that received enormous public subsidy from the government, from the people, say that they should only be dictated by market logic, and they should be able to go and demand bribes from Google or from Boing Boing or from Hulu in exchange for priority carriage and slow down the services of anyone who won't pay the bribes? How do we establish a norm where we say to network companies, if you don't want to run your networks in the public interest, that's fine, just get your wires out of the public dirt. Put the wires in at your own expense. Buy your rights of way by the meter. Or do we give up and allow the networks to continue to try to shape the winners and losers in the market?
Well, that's a classic case where public policy is required. That is why I strongly support a net neutrality law. And there are so many opportunities for abuse when there are dominant providers of the network, the pipes, who can leverage that dominance to abuse the legitimate rights of content providers or other participants using in the system, using the network. I don't necessarily think that it should be a pure public utility model, but I think that there should be very strict safeguards to protect against the abuse of power by the owners of the pipes directed at the creators of the content or the users and consumers of the content. And if you don't have the public policy, it's not going to happen. Have to happen.
Right, absolutely. I know, I can tell you, Tim and I resonate very strongly with this point of view. One thing that is interesting to see is one country's choice to try to solve the problem. The Australian government decided that it itself will pay for the cost of the capital cost of producing fiber to everyone's home in the entire country. It's interesting to try to follow all the business model logic, but it's very much like building other kinds of shared infrastructure. It's like building the road system. Most roads are not private roads, they're public roads. They're maintained as a public good. And what I think we've discovered is that the internet is more a public good than any of us might have imagined in its origins. And we need to treat it that way. In the absence of a disciplined market which has enough competition to avoid the abuse, you have to have public policy. One solution is the segregation of the underlying physical facilities from the competitive market, which then has wholesale access to it. The other possibility is structural separation, so that there are rules that apply to access to the underlying capacity. There are different possible solutions, but I think, as Vice President Gore says, you have to have public policy in order to induce a satisfactory result.
Just one thing I take issue with there, when you introduced this, you slipped in, now these guys who are they're putting their wires under our public roads. That's not where their obligation to be public good comes from, okay? Yes, you could argue that, and maybe in a local town you can use that as leverage to say, look, if you want to put wires under the road, fiber under the road, then you have to adopt this policy. But that's not where it comes from. So, for example, somebody who does everything completely wirelessly, it's still internet. And in fact, when you pay, when I pick up my phone, and I may be using a Wi-Fi and I may be using 3G, I may not notice the difference. The Wi-Fi I may use may actually be from a friend's mobile Wi-Fi, which is actually coming from 3G. And nowadays the 3G actually may not be real 3G base station. It's actually a little box connected that the campus party put in that's connected back to a fiber, which is on their own internet. So for most people, for me as an internet user, whether it's wireless or whether it's wired, as not really relevant to the fundamental principles. So I think what we need to keep our eye on is the fundamental principles. So it's the internet service providers have to keep the net a neutral substrate, because the net is now a fundamental part of our life, not so far away from the water we drink and the air we breathe. Is something that we use it all the time, and yes, if you take the internet away, somebody still lives, but they don't have a social life. If they're a teenager, they don't if they work from home, they don't have a job. So, and when they are sick, they are not capable of going somewhere to find the crucial piece of information about which their disease is and what drug they should take. So there are really crucial ways in which the internet now is making a huge difference between the people who have effective access to the internet, that is not just access to the internet, but they're really using the web, and people who are not. So we've got this difference between the people who are part of the internet society and the people who aren't. And in fact, maybe only 20% of the world have, and the other 80% aren't. But that difference, when you look at it, is so great. We're just hearing stories upstairs about people talking about even different ways in which it changes your life. It is because that difference is so important to human beings and to all the parts of our life that the internet service providers have a duty to provide internet in a neutral way. It's a fundamental principle.
That's very well said, thank you. So I'm going to move on, I think, to our last question, given the time here, from the audience. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Vint.
Me is one of the most useless parts of the internet. And I will now confess to you, especially considering we're making good use of it right here in this session, that ultimately it turned out to be a really powerful and impressive tool for getting information out to a large number of interested people in a hurry. I even see that as being very powerful in emergency situations on top of the kinds of applications we see now. So my honest answer to you is that what some of us might think of as a useless part of the internet might in fact turn out to be a very useful part. We should never be surprised when our intuitions are wrong.
Well, much to my surprise, but based on my recent habits in using the internet, I would have to say the answer to that question would be the desktop.
So you've gone entirely tablet and laptop?
Pretty much. It's rare that I use one, not even if, and you know, I have them at home and at offices. And,
very infamous pictures of you sitting amidst.
Yeah, and I used to, up until just a year ago, but I find now that I'll use the iPad or the iPhone or a Mac, and it just doesn't seem worth it to shift over. But that's just me.
Tim?
I suppose I could twist that a little bit. So, what's the most useless in the sense that it's unusable? For me, the web is the space of all that information, the space of all the data. I can make links between it all. And for me, your web includes all the stuff you've got access to, including a lot of stuff that I don't have access to, and a lot of that stuff is actually on your desktop. But when you have something on your virtual desktop, it's on your machine, it's in files. So it's files you're writing, and in fact, I tend to write files in HTML when I can't. But a lot of people write files using applications which don't immediately allow linking. And so, in fact, the stuff which is on your computer is really valuable, but you don't link it very much. Typically, when you put something in your calendar, you don't make links for the people to where they are in the social networking space. When you make links they're starting to make links from calendars into maps, into the map worlds. They're not very good links between calendars and locations, but certainly a calendar doesn't have very good links to the people who are involved in a meeting. They're crummy sort of links. They're not web links. So in a way, there's a whole lot of information. A lot of it's really interesting data that I have. All my bank account stuff, which I've downloaded, really valuable to me. It's not really part of the web. I can't link it. I can't share it easily with people. So there's this. So what I call the web includes all that data that's on my computer now. I don't want to have to upload it to the cloud I want software that allows me to treat it as part of the web, if you like, as part of the big cloud, but it still sits there on my machine where I control it and I back it up and I get to say who gets access to it. That's the underutilized piece of the web.
I think that's very well said. I think generally anything that's not linkable drives me bonkers. Well, I think that's it for time. Is that right, gents? No? All done? Thank you all very much for coming out today. Thank you. Gracias. Y gracias para su atención. Gracias para mis compañeros aquí. Gracias al señor Gore. Gracias al señor Cerf. Gracias al señor Berners-Lee. Gracias a todos ustedes. Y tienen un buen día aquí al Campus Party.